Aloha, namaste. This is Alexis Radahome, and I am here to talk about our new moon, our solar eclipse, and Diwali, the Festival of Lights, all coming up for us this coming week. Here in Hawaii, it's going to be October 25th at 5:48 a.m. when the moon and sun come together in exact conjunction for that new moon, which would be 8:48 a.m. Pacific Daylight Time. And the festival of Diwali is really actually over a 5-day period, and it begins before the new moon. So it begins when the moon is still waning on the 13th Titi, the 13th lunar phase. And so in India, that's going to start on the 24th. Of course, in the US and Hawaii, it's going to be the 23rd. So we have this this period of time leading up to the darkness where we begin these celebrations. So I'm going to dive into all of that, but let's start with the eclipse since that's the thing on most people's mind. This is a partial solar eclipse, so this is not going to be a full eclipse of the sun, and it's also not going to be visible everywhere. It's not going to be visible here where I am. It's not going to be visible in the mainland US. It'll mostly be visible in Northern Europe, in places like Sweden and Finland, and move into the Middle East, and even over to India, even into the very northern part of India that meets Pakistan, will be visible as well. And then there'll be some places that will get just a little bit of the eclipse, not the maximum. But again, even those places will get to see it where they get to see the full thing. It would be still partial, right? It's not a total solar eclipse. The lunar eclipse coming in a couple weeks is going to be a full lunar eclipse, a total one. This particular eclipse is happening from 10:58 p.m. on the 24th to 3:02 a.m. on the 25th. Again, that's Hawaii time. So in Pacific Daylight Time, that's going to be actually already the 25th, so 1 a.m. to 5 a.m. So of course, you won't be able to see it there either. But that period of time, that little portal of time is very poignant. You're actually not supposed to go outside to look at eclipses according to not just the ancient Indian seers, but pretty much all wise traditions across planet Earth have some form of honoring eclipses and not going out and bathing in them. So it's a pretty Western concept to go out and stare at the sun while it's being eclipsed, or even the moon. But that is a portal of time that can be really powerful for prayer and meditation and fasting and things like that. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so we can see some of the details here. You can see we have our moon, sun, and Venus joined at the south node. So this is an eclipse with the south node. The two nodes have been holding court in this Aries Libra axis for about 6 months now. So since March 16th of 2022, they moved into Aries and Libra. And we've already had some eclipses that have occurred earlier in the year, and this is the second round. The south node being joined our sun, our moon, and of course Venus, who's the ruler of Libra, is going to be a pretty intense experience. And you can see they're all in pretty close degrees. They're all in the same nakshatra called Swati. I'll talk about Swati in a minute. But the south node is where we're really pulling away. It's where we are not sending our attention. In the myth of the nodes, they begin as a whole being and are cut by Vishnu's discus at the neck. So Rahu, the north node, which is up here in Aries by itself at the moment, is that obsessive part of us, that part of us that's just devouring everything in life and wants more, and isn't really digesting what we're receiving. The south node is that neck down to the end of the tail, where we have all of the past life information, all of that wisdom, all of that knowledge, all of that collected information within us, but we don't have our head to engage. So wherever the south node is, in our natal charts or in transit, it's that place we're not looking. And of course, when there's something like an eclipse, or there can be cycles that run dasha cycles or other kinds of transits that force us to look at this place, it can be very painful because we're choosing not to look out of a sense of disgust, out of a sense of, maybe we feel like we've already done that because we have all this past life information there. We have all this wisdom in that area of our life. So we're like, okay, we've been doing that thing already. And we're hyper focusing on the place where Rahu is, where the North Node is. These eclipse points they're not bodies in the sky, right? They're shadow planets. They're Chaya Graha, and they're mathematically figured out places in the sky where when there's a full and new moon, there's going to be an eclipse. And in the mythology, they're like literally chasing the sun and the moon. They're chasing the luminaries because they were the ones that ratted them out for taking the soma, the immortal nectar. And so they're always forever chasing our luminaries. The moon is our mind, it's our emotions, it's our psyche. The sun is our power, it's our authority, it's our sense of leadership, and it's also our connection to source. So it's our consciousness. When the sun is eclipsed, there's a feeling of our power being reset. And it's particularly powerful and potent in this moment in time because our sun is debilitated in Libra. The sun, this bright orb that gives us light and energy and power, does not like being in this airy sign of compromise. Because when we are coming from that perspective with our power, with our authority, or even with our connection to source, we are doling it out to anyone and everything out of a place of wanting to seek harmony as opposed to true power, true knowledge, true truth, right? The thing that should actually connect us to source. So this is where we give it away. This is where we're like, oh, that's what's going to make everybody else happy, as opposed to what's right and what's true. And so we can see that the sun being in this state is already problematic for us. We already have that coming up for us. And that's actually why this festival of lights is celebrated this time. That's why Diwali happens at this time, because the sun is debilitated. When the sense of power is debilitated, when our source of light is debilitated, we need to light up from inside. We need to light candles and find our inner source of power, our inner source of light, because it'll be harder to find outside of us. So that's why this festival takes place at this time. But of course, we have Ketu here to confuse things and make it a little more, I would say, painful, but it's also just kind of debilitating our power even more, right? It's taking the attention away from it. And Ketu has this tendency to have a feeling of erraticism. Like it's just like all of a sudden out of somewhere something implodes. It doesn't even explode, right? It implodes, because Ketu is where we're going deep, 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 deep down into something in order to find the source, in order to find that one thing that's still not right, that's still not resolved. Because if we think of Rahu and Ketu as our karma, which they are, Rahu's the new karma we're trying to open up. That's why we're so excited about it. We're like, please give me more of that, give me more of that. That's what I'm trying to do. Where Ketu is our old karma. And we're like, yeah, I've already done that. Didn't I finish that already? But we did not, right? Because this axis is existing. And what we're trying to do is integrate the nodes. We're trying to bring them back together because that's how they were before. We want the past life information to inform where we're going. We want that axis to have a nice, clean communication between them. And this can happen over time in our natal charts when we have a placement, wherever our axis of Rahu Ketu is in our own chart. But of course, in transit, we don't have that much time to work with it. So we're all collectively working with it too, which also makes it intense. For people who have this placement in their chart, it's very powerful coming to these returns, right? When they're either coming to a return of Rahu Ketu in the same exact place or a reverse return. And there's going to be a lot of potent information that comes for them for what they've been traversing their whole life. For the rest of us, this is like a sudden obsession wherever Aries is, and it's a sudden kind of, pulling away wherever Libra is. And maybe we have planets in these places, which are going to be greatly affected. And of course, also the sun and the moon, Venus and the moon are also here, which are our two planets of relating. Mercury is also a planet of relating, but the sun, Venus and the moon are feminine planets. The moon is our receptivity. It is our mind and our emotions, but it's also the part of us that wants to attach to something. It's the part of us that's sort of roiling around in this vulnerable state, just like really wanting something to roll up against and to solidify it or stabilize it. and it's our point of vulnerability. Venus is that part of us that's engaging with people, often romantically, but but also other forms of adults who have mutual needs on the table also fit into this Venus category, where we're trying to make things nice, we're trying to make things beautiful, we want to be happy, we want pleasure, we want joy, and we want we want everyone to win, right? We want everyone to get along. So this particular eclipse is bringing up our relationships more than it would if Venus wasn't there, right? Or if it was the lunar eclipse, right, and the moon was across the way, it would be different. But in this particular case, on this particular day, we can see that Venus is very close to our moon and sun. So this also means that not only is our moon being shadowed, like the moon is eclipsed kind of in a way every month. Every new moon, the sun and the moon come together and we don't see our moon, right? And that's what's happening in an eclipse. Those are the places in the sky where we don't see the luminaries when they're being eclipsed. They've been like devoured by this black hole of space. And that's the only time we see the eclipse points. That's the only time Rahu Ketu come into a state of visibility. Well, the moon has that happen once a month, right? And Venus right now is so close to the sun that while it's it's also like that, right? Because it's close to the sun, we're not going to see it because we see the planets at night when the moon is out. So if we're, if it's close to the sun, we're not going to see it. We're not going to see Venus, but we're also not going to feel as comfortable with our Venus energy just because it's next to the sun. We're going to feel that the burning rays of the sun are actually like eating up our relational planet, are eating away at our happiness. Even though she's in her own sign, even though this is exactly where she shines in Libra, it's not going to feel that way. It's going to feel painful. Like there's like our sense of happiness has like a very short fuse that it's very easy to come out of harmony. It's very easy to snap out of feeling good or feeling as though we're getting our needs met in mutual reciprocity. And then we have Ketu here. And Ketu again has that erratic quality. And the erratic quality of Ketu comes from the fact that we're not paying attention. We're driving deep, 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 deep down to find out what's wrong and where that point is of contention or disgust, but we're not looking. We're not paying any attention to what's actually happening in the world. We've inverted our gaze so much that we're not looking around us. And as a result, anything that happens in the outside world feels sudden and unexpected. Feels like that just came out of nowhere. It's like, well, it's been sitting there the whole time. We just never turned our head to look at it, right? So this is the kind of stuff that comes up with Ketu, is stuff that we have been avoiding, stuff we have been choosing to look away from, and yet comes up anyway. So whatever house Libra is for you in your chart, and this is really important that it's, when you're looking at these alignments, that we're working with the sidereal chart, you're working with your Vedic chart. So not, a lot of people write me saying, oh, I'm a Libra this or I'm a that, but I mean, what your Vedic placements are. If you have planets here, they're definitely getting affected also. But even if you don't have any planets here, whatever house Libra is for you, this is going to be really important for you. This is going to be the place that you haven't been looking, and this is going to be the place where things are exploding. The other thing that's going to be really important for you is what the sun rules, because it's the thing getting eclipsed. So if the sun is, say, you're a Leo and it's your ruling planet, you are getting eclipsed, right? That reset on your power is all about your entire identity. For, Taurus, it's the fourth house. It has to do with the home. It has to do with cars. It has to do with the mother. For a Scorpio rising, this is their 12th house, and that's their 10th lord. So it's going to have to do with their career, their way of making ends meet, but also meeting their external responsibilities, their status, their recognition. That's getting eclipsed. And it's happening in whatever house Libra is. So it's happening in whatever, for Scorpio in that example, it's the 12th house. It's happening through like delusion, confusion, not paying attention, escape. So it's really important to understand these things. And that's why I do these reports, these free reports for all 12 rising signs, because it's so different for each one of us what something means. We can give these big transit reports and talk about what's happening overall, and it will resonate with people in little places. But the truth is, for each of us, it's very different. For some people, some of the more challenging alignments that are really, really doing us in can be awesome. They can be like the best thing that ever happened to them and give them something very powerful. For other people, it can be just a time of great tragedy and grief. So it really is different for each of us. And it mostly depends on your Vedic rising sign. That's the primary factor we would look at, is what house it is for you and what house these planets are ruling. And of course, your moon's also getting eclipsed, because it always is at this time. And then Venus is not just ruling Libra, but Venus also rules Taurus. So whatever house Taurus rules is also going to be connected to this house that Libra rules for you in your chart. So I do have one report that I've had up since that March 16th transit, when they moved into this Aries Libra axis. And it is, where Rahu in Aries is for you and where Ketu in Libra is for you in your chart. So if you are not on my email list already, you should sign up. It's at www.radhahomeyoga.com. It should be at the bottom of the screen, if I did my tech right. And you can sign up for the email list and get that report, as well as one for Saturn and Jupiter and all 12 signs, that shows you what actually is activated in your chart, because that makes all the difference in the world. It really, really changes things. Doesn't necessarily change that the thing is happening, but it does give you awareness of it and know that, this too shall pass. It gives you some dates on when that will happen, but also, really helps you hone in on what the issue is for you, as opposed to just sort of this general malaise or this general feeling of suffering that we often have. So the nakshatra that this is happening in, Swati, is one that is right in the middle of Libra. And this really brings up the most Libran issue there is, which is individuation. Libras have a tendency to spend so much time worrying about where everybody else is, what everyone else is doing. Is this okay? Is that hurting that person? Is that bothering that person? Is this, it's this constant balancing act of trying to, make everything feel good, really, because Venus is the ruler and that's the motivation. The motivation is to be happy and to feel good. And so, and to connect and to have connective energy. So if we fold a little bit, it's worth it because we want to get along. When people say, do you want to be right or do you want to be happy? It's that kind of thing. That's a very Libran concept. Swati is ruled by Vayu, the wind that's taking us everywhere, and we have no control, right? The winds are just blowing us this way and that way. And it's very hard to hold ourselves steady in strong wind. Even trees are swaying in the wind. Even sometimes buildings are swaying in the wind. So we too are swaying in that wind. It's an air sign already, right? Libra's already an air sign. So it's already got a lot to do with the mind and the vacillations of the mind. And this particular nakshatra is ruled by the wind and by the north node Rahu. So by this devouring mouth. Rahu has a quality of great vata, of wind energy already. It's very scattered. It's very dispersive, and it has this quality of exaggerating or blowing up or magnifying anything that it sees. So it's like delusional. Both of the nodes have their own delusion, but they're coming from a different place. Rahu's delusion is coming from the place of seeing everything bigger than it is and like dispersing all the details out. And that quality, keeps us really ungrounded. It puts us in a position where we're not able to center ourselves. So one of the symbols of Swati is the sword. And I think of it as a sword where we're like fighting these imaginary demons. We're like, that's after us. So that's after us. So this is a problem. Well, that's a problem. But it's all in our head. It's all in our mind. It's all part of the illusion. And most of the time we find that if we're able to have conversations with people in our lives and sort of bring things out into the open, then a lot will tame down. A lot of the energy we have of anxiety or, even anger and sadness and things like that. But that often comes from the starting place of anxiety when we're talking about this kind of delusional energy, can be relieved once we bring it out into the air and we allow things to come out. The more we talk about things, the more we share what's going on with ourselves, with our partners, with our friends, with our, community, with our parents or our children or whoever we need to share it with, the more we can clear the air. Because nobody wants to be in tension. Nobody's looking to be, aggravated in this all the time. It's just these delusions in our head make us feel that way. We feel like someone's doing something to us, or we feel like somebody's trying to keep us a certain way or control us in this way. And it really helps to clear the air. It helps to bring it out and talk about it, which is something that we might do in some circumstances. But in this case, with Venus being so close to the sun and also close to Ketu, we're pulling away from the part of us that's harmonious. We're pulling towards the part of us that's selfish and like, this is my agenda and this is how I'm going to do it. And I don't care what anyone else is doing. I'm going this way. This is where I'm going. And so we're not paying as much attention to other people and their needs and feelings. We're not being as harmonious. And our own happiness is snapping on a dime, both from that close conjunction to the sun, which we call combust, right? You can just tell from that word, it's like combustion, where we can get, kind of like, wow, like I'm not, my needs aren't being met. I'm not being cared for, I'm not having this mutual experience. I'm giving, and I'm not receiving, or whatever story we tell ourselves. Which is a big Libra story, right? I give, and no one else is giving. And it's like, well, we shouldn't give in expectation of someone else giving. That should just be part of an agreement. And if we're in agreements or situations where we're giving too much and we're not receiving in return, we need to express that or move on, get out of those agreements because they're not going to work for us. Particularly the moon in Venus sign in Libra can really do this to us, where we feel like we're giving from an unconditional place and we just expect others to give back. But, anyone who doesn't have Libra energy is not as likely to give back. Maybe people with some Cancer or Taurus or something might give something, but for the most part, we have to assume that everyone else is not the same as us. And so when we do a favor for someone, if we're doing it expecting that they're then going to return that favor, we're probably going to be disappointed. And these are the kind of things that can make us feel really upset in this moment. We might have a greater tolerance for at other times, and right now we might not. And whatever's been building up resentment over the last 6 months when K2 first moved into this placement is also going to just explode on us because we've been sort of stuffing down all the selfishness or all the ways in which we haven't seen other people showing up. What we probably haven't been looking at is the ways in which we've been doing that, right? The ways in which we've been less harmonious or less compromising or less willing to do that. Now, I always look at the bright side of every transit. I think that there's things that are, the challenges in our life, the things that bring us through the ringer and make us feel pain and suffering are the very things that bring us towards our growth. We're never going to grow if we don't feel pain. If everything feels nice all the time, we're never going to move on. We're never going to see the error of our ways. So I spoke about this a little bit with Venus last time because Venus has actually had a pretty rough run. Venus is sandwiched between Gemini and Libra with 3 of the hardest placements for Venus to be in. In Venus and Cancer, we feel like, I've been giving and giving and giving. I always give, it's like where we're mothering our partners or something, and we don't feel like we get anything in return. Venus and Leo is when we feel like we are the king, we are the queen. Why is everybody not bowing down to us? Where's my throne? No one brought my tiara today. Why am I not being served by everybody? And then Venus in Virgo is debilitated. It's where we're very nitpicky, where we think everything's wrong with everything, and where we feel within ourselves all of our errors, all the ways we're not beautiful, all the ways we're not perfect. And it can be very challenging. So normally Venus moving into Libra is like this great breath of fresh air. But in this particular case, that's not totally true. So this is one more opportunity for us to see things in our relationships that can't make it through difficult challenges. If we're in a relationship that can't make it through difficult challenges, that's a big red flag that we should be looking at. If we can only be okay when Venus is in great dignity and everybody's happy, then our relationship is probably pretty superficial and founded on false ground. If we can walk through the trenches with our partner, and if we can have these tough experiences and still come back together, then we're on a little bit more solid of a foundation. So first of all, it can call into question the actual relationships we're in. But of course, we always want to blame it on the actual relationship. We always want to think it's, if I just found a different person, if it's just this, it's this person, this other person that is making it challenging. We don't want to look at ourselves often. But this Venus is really asking us to look at ourselves and to look at the ways in which we ourselves have not been harmonious, or we ourselves have not been compromising. How have we not been communicating what our needs are? And maybe that's why we're not getting them met. Perhaps it's not that the other person is just a selfish jerk. Maybe we aren't very good at telling people what we need, what we feel, and what we want. And so this is an opportunity to really look at that with quite a lot of intelligence, because while K2 can feel very painful, he's also bringing all that wisdom. There's a lot of intelligence wherever K2 is. And Swati is asking us to stop fighting false demons, illusions, and start standing in our power and finding what is true for us and walking from that place. And a debilitated planet like the sun, as challenging as it is, brings up the worst possible energy of that planet. So it gives us a chance to really reflect on what's wrong with our sense of power, particularly whatever house the sun rules for you, right? Where are you feeling unempowered? Where do you feel like you have no say and no leadership and no authority? And how can you surrender into that a little, first of all, right? Because it's true, we live in a world where a lot of power has been taken and therefore other people don't have power, right? There's people who bought the land or who've bought the companies and the resources and who are controlling the government and telling us what we have to do. There's a lot of ways in which it's easy to feel powerless in this particular world we're living in. So how can we find our inner power? How can we find that even in that worst moment, we still have some kind of power somewhere? And where is the power? It's in our mind. For those of you who've read the book Shantaram, it takes place in India, and there's this Australian prisoner that begin in the very beginning of the book, like the very first page of the book. And I've read the whole book, but there are books on this earth where I've just read the first page, and I could tell you so much about the book just from that first page. And I'm not sure if this is the absolute first page, but it's definitely the first chapter, where he's basically being, beaten or tortured or something in prison. And it's been a long time since I've read this book, so forgive me if it's fresher in your mind and I'm saying it wrong. But he's in the worst place he could possibly be, right? He's in prison, he's being beaten, he's just like, this sucks. And he finds his power. He finds his power in that moment through his mind. And anyone who's ever suffered serious tragedy, particularly of the physical sort, it's like, that's the only choice. The only choice we have. Find your power from within. Find where the light is. Because ultimately, even our own bodies and even our own lives and everything we're experiencing here on Earth is part of a bigger illusion. It's part of a bigger play. And we can't step out of it until we recognize that. And even when we recognize that, even if we've been lucky enough to get a glimpse of that, it's not that easy to step out of, right? We're so mired in our reality. We're so entrenched in it. It can be really hard to pull out. So this eclipse is a good opportunity for us to really look at that. The moon is your mind, the sun is your power and your consciousness, and Venus is your relations with others. So no matter where these planets rule for you in your chart, that's going to hold true from a place of what they indicate, what they're a karaka of. And then K2, the south node, is your past life, your past stuff, and your early childhood. Wow, powerful time to dive deep. This could be a great time to, do things like hypnosis or past life regression or, family constellations or anything that kind of has you look at where you've come from, particularly in your relationships. And in 2 weeks, we'll have a chance to look at our selfishness and really see how the ways in which we've been disharmonious have and been, activating towards what we want without regard for how it affects others, how that's affecting us. So these are powerful times. These are very powerful times for sure. I'm gonna not talk too long about the other transits just because I don't want to make this the longest thing ever. But Mars did just move into Gemini, and he's there until November 13th. And so we're having a little shift. And for most of us, it's going to feel different because Mars is very fiery, and fiery planet on Taurus, in the Earth sign. And this is actually something I just did a little mini report on, and I'll attach it to my email list sending on how both the sun and Mars moved from earth signs to air signs. So both of these fiery planets, and the sun is considered a graha. Graha means to grab. So all the planets are called grahas, from the luminaries, the sun and the moon, to the nodes, Rahu and Ketu, which are chaya graha, shadow planets. And then the actual planets of Mars, Venus, Saturn, Jupiter, and Mercury, they're all called grahas because their energy is grabbing us, right? Like gravity. It's like a pull, an energetic pull. So these fiery orbs being in earth places made things like the earth and our bodies hot. And they've moved into air signs. And now they're making our mind hot and potentially our communication, since it's Gemini, hot, and our communication in relationships hot. So this is something to reflect upon in your own life and the ways in which it showed up. In my life, it's very easy to see. I'm a Taurus rising, first of all, so the heat was literally on me, and I definitely felt it the minute it moved off. My child is a Scorpio rising, so I could see the reflection on him, and he had this crazy rash all over his body that he's had literally since Mars moved into Taurus. And the minute it moved into Gemini, it started to dissipate. So we can see it in very physical, tangible ways. These transits are amazing that way. We can see where I live too. It was like so hot for so many days, and it rained all day the day that Mars moved in to Gemini. So these are very powerful transits that occur. I think it was the 15th that Mars moved, the 17th the Sun moved into Libra, and the 18th Venus moved into Libra. So these are the dates you can look at. So Mars in Gemini is going to be there for a couple days, and then on the 30th, so the day before Halloween, he's going to begin his retrograde cycle. So whatever Mars rules for you is going to start to back up and go backwards, rerunning over these things. Collectively, Mars rules action, courage, discipline, and anger. Mars is not operating at his highest intelligence in either Taurus or Gemini. Taurus is where we're a little lazy with our discipline. Honestly, we fold on it because we want to have fun instead. We want to have pleasure instead. We want to take a bath instead. We want to eat a meal instead. We want to have sex instead. We want to do anything other than, our disciplined regular actions to strengthen ourselves. It can be a time to, maybe take on some disciplinary action around diet, like to focus our attention on something like that. It can be a fiery time for our sex life, but it's not the best transit for our discipline, for that regular, repeated showing up again and again and again to create a habit or to lose a habit, as some people approach it. I'm more of add a good habit, less than hyper focusing on what you're doing wrong, but everyone has their own way of punishing themselves, I guess. Mars in Gemini is also not in great dignity. It's where we're fighting with our words. It's where we're angry. It's where we are black and white. This is right, this is wrong, which is not Gemini's way. Gemini is very flexible and open and just taking in information and like not being really tied to one opinion or another and not having an agenda with the information. Mars is going to come in with this agenda called, I want to make it right or wrong, black or white, and I'm angry about it. Anything that's wrong is wrong. And particularly in the star Mrigashira. Mrigashira is the searching star. It's the star searching for truth. So it's where we're actually literally leaving everything we've known, the family values of the second house, and moving into the third house and creating our I identity. It's like if you have a child or no children, it's when they turn 3 and they start to become like their own individual self and they become kind of defiant. So Mars already has a third house quality, and Gemini is the natural third house. It's the house of the ego, the house of the will. And it comes, again, in the mind, right? As he retrogrades, goes back, we might have to run over old patterns of our discipline, of our action, of our courage. How do we show up? What are the reasons we get angry? What are the ways in which we get angry? And again, whatever houses Mars rules for you is going to be really important. So if you go back to that Scorpio, I mean, that's their ruling planet. So that's them retrograding, going back over their own identity. That's big. For Taurus people, it's their 7th lord. So it's going to be, and that's true for both of Mars's planet, Aries people and Scorpio people. Mars is their ruling planet. Taurus people and Libra people, it's their 7th lord. So it's going to have to do with relationships. Also, it's important because Mars is the ruler of this Rahu. right? This Rahu here in Aries. And I'll talk about this more next week, or I mean, in 2 weeks when we do the full moon eclipse, the total lunar eclipse. Mars is the ruler of that eclipse and he's retrograde. So that'll be another thing to think about, the fact that we're running back over old ground and reviewing things in an eclipse that's opening up new karma. And that just wants to keep moving forward and keep trial and erroring things and not learning our lessons. So that's another interesting thing to reflect upon. The other thing is that Mars does a one-way drishti, and it is on Mercury, the planet that rules Gemini. Mercury's in his own other sign, but he's a final degree, so he's about to move into Libra as well. But it's not a very close drishti. I mean, he's at 1 degree. This is at 28 degrees. It's almost negligible, but he is in this sign of Gemini, and that's Mercury's sign. And Mercury is exalted at this moment of this eclipse. And when I'm making this video, this could be good because there's some precision with the words with Mercury and Virgo. Like we might want to be clear in our words and be right in our words and not say more than we need to or less than we need to. But sometimes, especially in relationships, the quality of Mercury and Virgo can be a bit robotic. Like it can feel unfeeling. It's like not that friendly. It's like, okay, you're accurate, but could you care about my feelings a little? You know, there's that sort of computerized accuracy. So that can lend to some of that black and white Marsian thinking that's going on. The other drishti that we have going on here, well, we have 2 other drishtis. Saturn is giving drishti to this Jupiter here, and Saturn, you'll note, is no longer retrograde, and that's only 2 days before this eclipse. So Saturn on the 23rd goes direct, right before Mars turns retrograde. Saturn's going direct. That's a pretty big blessing, I'd say, because Mars and Saturn are arguably the 2 harshest planets that we have to deal with. There are 2 most malefic planets other than the nodes. And so having both of them retrograde at the same time can be a bit much. It's kind of nice that they're passing the baton. So our fear and our sense of time and pressure is finally going to start moving forward as our anger and courage and discipline starts to regress and move backwards. But of course, again, it's really going to matter on what it rules for you and how it affects you. But Saturn has been retrograde for a long time. That's the other thing, is Saturn and Jupiter go retrograde for a really long period of time. So it's just refreshing in this area of our life to be able to move forward again. And again, if you're not already on my email list and you don't have these reports, you should look up what Saturn is for you so that you know what areas of your life are forward moving. And it's been a long time. Saturn's been in Capricorn since January of 2020. So 3 years we're looking at. He's not moving into Aquarius officially until 2023, until the end of January of 2023. And this retrograde action's been for almost 6 months. So we've been really doing the Saturn thing for quite some time. And you will definitely feel some forward motion in this area of your life when he begins his direct motion again. And his drishti is going on Jupiter, who's still retrograde. Again, the degrees are far. We're not seeing too strong of degrees. And this has been a drishti that's been going on for some time. That 3rd house drishti gaze. Drishti is an energetic gaze. And it's really just taking some of the hopefulness and the expansion of Jupiter and that wisdom that's available to us and kind of bringing a reality check to it. Like, oh yeah, but there's these limitations. Oh yeah, but this is what's actually happening in the world. And taking some of the spiritual element and again, grounding it in reality and humility and taking out the sort of fanciful delusion and projection that Pisces can really bring. Jupiter and Mercury are still in mutual drishti, but again, the gaze is weak because the degrees have moved out and these 2 have been staring each other for a while, passing back and forth, wisdom and discernment, knowledge and that more expansive knowledge. But Saturn is also giving drishti to this eclipse. And the degrees are close to Ketu beyond all the other ones. But this is going to be important even though the degrees are not that tight, because Saturn's 10th house drishti onto all of this is going to have a lot to do with responsibility and duty. The one-way drishtis from the outer planets come from a house. So Saturn gives the 3rd house drishti, that's like the ego and the will, and then he gives the 10th house drishti, which is the showing up for external responsibilities, right? It's the career house, the house of the father. It's the house where we are dutiful and where we have status and recognition and hold that more public space. And it's pressure, right? Saturn's forward moving now. So the pressure is forward moving. It's not internalizing like it's been. It's been building up. What am I not doing? What am I not showing up for? What am I committed to? Do I like these commitments? Do I not like these commitments? And it's like, bam. K2 is where we're cutting things off. We're more than happy to cut things off wherever K2 is because we don't even like whatever K2 is doing anyway. Whatever K2 is doing is like the thing we're least interested in. So we're like, sure, I'll quit, no problem, you know? So you can see that this can be things like quitting jobs because of not feeling appreciated, not feeling, not feeling received, not feeling like you're getting what you need in return. You can see that this pressure is going to really like, what am I committed to? Oh, that's not working for me at all. Now, of course, for everybody, again, Saturn's going to rule something different for Cancer and Leo people. Saturn is their seventh lord. It has to do with relationships. But it's still, Saturn is an indicator, a karaka of career and of what we are committed to with our time and how we spend our time. And for sure, your relationships will be involved because it's Libra and Venus is there. So that's going to be an interesting thing. The pressure's on, but also that sense of like, hey, I've been stewing on this for 3 years, right? And I've been retrograding on this for 6 months and I'm ready to take some action. Like, and some of that action is going to be to cut things out, right? And it's going to be very conscious what we choose to move forward with. So that's a powerful drishti that is going to really bring together this eclipse. And on that note, I will draw us to conclusion with just touching on a couple of the points of Diwali, which again starts 2 days before our actual new moon. So the 24th in India, but it's the 23rd in the United States. And the first day is that lighting of the lanterns that we see pictures all over the world. There's pictures of people with the lanterns. This is called Dhanteras. And it's said to be the day that the Ayurvedic god, Dhanavantari, I think I'm saying that right, came out of the great churning of the Milky Way and brought us Ayurveda. So this whole celebration of Diwali has a little bit to do with the story where it's also the story where the nodes are, which that part is more not coincidental, but it's more just true of this particular year. But the celebration of Diwali sort of centers around the 15th Tithi. The 15th Tithi is the new and full moon. So there's 14 phases, and then there's the 15th is our new or full moon every month. And that 15th Tithi is Lakshmi Puja. This is the primary day of Diwali. And this is the day when Lakshmi rose out of the great churning of the Milky Way. So all the gods and all the demons, the devas and the asuras, and asura just means without light, right? The devas are moving towards the light, the asuras are without light. Really, it's just the different aspects of our own being, right? The parts of us that want to rise up and want to be more spiritual, want to be more light, and then the parts of us that are taken down by our greed, by our lust, by our, whatever, our different lower qualities. The demons often act out of faith and goodwill, and the gods often manipulate and things like that too. So there's a lot of nuance in these stories. It's not to be taken in that sort of Christian sense. But anyway, they get together and they have to churn the great Milky Way ocean, and they do so to get the immortal nectar, to get this Amrita, which is the thing that Rahu Ketu's original being, Subramanian, I think is the name, wanted to get, right? But once the mortal nectar came out, the devas decided to just keep it for themselves and that the demons shouldn't get it because they didn't want to make any of those lower qualities immortal. And so Vishnu dressed himself up as Mohini, this really sensual woman, and he went around and he fed only the devas the Amrita and sort of tricked the asuras because they were, obsessed with his appearance. Well, this demon that became Rahu Ketu snuck in between the sun and the moon and ate some and got immortality. And then the sun and the moon ratted him out and Vishnu cut him in half. And so that actually is the reason that they're chasing the sun and the moon. But the whole point of this was to pull the immortal nectar out. And on the way, many gifts came out first. There was amazing, this beautiful jewel that came out. There was the cow that keeps giving, the ever-giving cow. There was a precious horse. But the two of the most important things that come out are this Ayurvedic god and Lakshmi, the goddess of grace, the goddess of fortune, the goddess of love. And as much as people pray to her for things, and she's probably one of the most prayed to for things that there is, I want relationship, I want fertility, I want money. Those are the three things people want from Lakshmi. What she really brings us is divine grace, the capacity to even be someone who can show up in relationship, right? You can get the person of your dreams, but are you able to even relate in a way that is full of grace or not? You could have all the money in the world, but what are you going to do with it? Are you going to hoard it? Are you going to continue to just get it? Are you going to mistreat others? Are you going to, degrade the earth with it? Or are you going to pass it out in a way where it is being used well? Fertility, whether or not you want that to be fertility of the earth and bounty, that's also sort of related to money when it comes to like food and growing things and harvesting, or whether you're talking about actually having a child. Why do we want these things? What are we using them for? Are we hoarding the food, or are we growing like fields and fields of GMO wheat so that we can, create whatever, or GMO corn so we can make corn syrup? Or are we growing like, a permaculture farm, really trying to create balance in the earth's ecosystem? Or are we trying to feed hungry people? Or are we trying to have a baby because we have some like, kind of ego need? Or are we really wanting to care for another being and help bring the next generation in a good way? So this is the kind of questions that Lakshmi brings up, at least for me, not coming from that sort of selfish, what can I get place, which is really, she is really the most misused goddess in that way. I like to pray to Mahalakshmi, the higher form of Lakshmi. She's one of the Das Mahavidyas, one of the 10 wisdom goddesses. And I often say, for whatever it is that I want in my life, if it is not meant to be, no worries, please guide me in a way that is more aligned for me. And that does make sense. That's how I look at that. And that's on that third day of Diwali, on the 15th TT, which is the actual new moon. So that's October 25th for us here in Hawaii and in the US, and the 26th in India. And then the fourth day is Govardhan Puja, which has to do with Krishna and Govardhan Hill. There's myths for each of these different days. And then the fifth day is called, I'm probably going to pronounce this wrong, but Bhaijtika. And this is the day when the brothers go to visit their sisters and just ask, inquire about their well-being. And it's when sisters pray for their brothers. So this has to do with siblings. And of course, if you don't have siblings, or you have only siblings of the same gender as you or whatever, you can pray for your brothers and sisters that are your friends or your family around you. So this is the celebration of that light within us and the sources of power that we have that are always available to us. So remembering that Diwali comes out in a way at a time when the sun is the most debilitated, and particularly in this moment, with everything that I went over, how much we might feel like we lack power, and our needs or our happiness can be dependent on others and what they're doing for us, and how they're reflecting it. And oh, they're all, all these false demons and things that are keeping us from our happiness. And then we could also just determine, and this isn't just like a meditative practice where you just go into yourself and you're just like, help me see the light. This is like, tell the people around you what you think, what you feel, tell your mom or your dad, what's going on for you. Tell your brother and your sister what's happening. Tell your children, even if need be. Tell your partner for sure. This is very much Venus, Libra stuff. Talk to the people in your life about what's going on. And not from a blaming perspective, not from the perspective of you're doing this to me, but from a perspective of how you feel and what your needs are and how they're not getting met. And maybe what your desires are too, which, are also important. That's one of the things Libra brings up for us, and that maybe we've been avoiding or looking away from, that like feeling shame in our society for even having desires. Like everything has to be need. If it's not a need, then we can't have it, and that's not true. We actually have a need to be happy. Also, we have a need to have pleasure and enjoyment in our life. We have a need for companionship. These are things that we have needs for too, and they feel fluffy or light, but they're actually just as important as food and air and water and everything else. So we're not here to just barely survive, right? We didn't come in with a frontal cortex to just literally not die every day. So that's some of what we can reflect upon in this time. I hope this is helpful. If you have not already signed up for my newsletter, it's www.radhahomeyoga.com. Blessed Diwali and new moon and solar eclipse. Namaste.